Welcome to Cabin of Horrors. The fire's dying down, the shadows are growing long, and something is waiting just beyond the door. Tonight's tale is not for the faint of heart. Imagine being alone, deep in the woods. No neighbors, no distractions, just you and the silence. But silence, as you'll learn, is never truly empty. Sometimes, it's just holding its breath. A writer seeking solitude finds herself haunted by a sound that follows her across miles, across time. A knock that doesn't just ask to be let in, it demands it. Turn off the lights, check your doors, and whatever you do, don't answer the third knock. Mara had always loved silence. Real silence, not city silence filled with distant traffic and muffled neighbors. No, what she craved was the kind that existed deep in the woods, where noise was a choice, not a constant. That's why she'd rented the old house in Grayson Hollow. Secluded, forested, no neighbors for miles, the perfect place to write. She arrived on a Thursday around dusk, the sky bruised with deep purples and dying sunlight. The house sat at the end of a narrow dirt road, its exterior weather-worn with paint curling off in flakes. It looked like something out of a forgotten photograph, untouched by time, but not in a romantic way. More like the world had deliberately left it behind. Inside, it smelled of cedar and age. The furniture was antique, mismatched, like each piece had been stolen from a different house. There were no modern amenities aside from a half-functioning electric stove and weak Wi-Fi. But Mara didn't mind. That was the point. She planned to be alone. She wanted to be alone. The first day went well. She unpacked, made some tea, took a walk through the surrounding woods. They were thick and shadowed even in daylight, the kind of place where you could hear twigs snap behind you and tell yourself it was just a deer. At night, the darkness swallowed everything outside the windows, the trees pressing in like curious onlookers. She slept deeply that first night, until 3:17 a.m., when the phone rang. A shrill, unnatural sound in the dead silence. Her cell phone, sitting face down on the nightstand, buzzed and lit up with an unknown caller. She hesitated before answering. There was no reason anyone should be calling her. No one even knew where she was. She picked up the phone and heard only static. Then 3 slow knocks came through the speaker. Deliberate, not like something failing or a glitch. It was a rhythm, a message. She hung up and sat up in bed, her chest feeling tight. That's when she heard it again. This time, it came from downstairs. Mara froze. The house was old, yes, and it made sounds. Settling wood, wind, maybe a raccoon in the walls. But this wasn't like that. These were knocks, rhythmic and measured. They came from beneath her feet, from the basement. She slid out of bed and crept to the hallway. The floorboards moaned under her steps. The house felt different now, heavier, like the air had thickened while she slept. She reached the top of the staircase and stared down into the dark. The basement door was at the end of the hall, closed. She hadn't opened it since she arrived. She hadn't needed to. Then there was another knock, this time louder. She turned on the hallway light. It blinked once, then went out. The house fell into complete darkness. Mara swallowed hard and forced herself to move. She opened the basement door slowly, bracing for something, anything, to lunge out. But there was only blackness. Her phone flashlight barely cut through the dark. Cold air rose from below like a breath. And that's when she heard it. Someone whispering her name. Soft, wet, like someone whispering through a mouthful of mud. She slammed the door shut and locked it. Her hands were shaking now and her breath was shallow. The cold wasn't from the house. It was inside her, crawling up her spine. The phone rang again. Same unknown number. She didn't answer it this time, just stared as it vibrated across the nightstand. It stopped after a few rings. and then came a text that said, "Let me in." She left the phone on the floor and sat in the corner of her bedroom, lights on, eyes fixed on the door. Morning eventually came. She didn't sleep. She had barely moved from that corner in her bedroom. When sunlight finally spilled through the windows, she stood on legs that barely worked and began to pack her bag. By noon, she was back in town, standing outside a small general store. The woman behind the counter noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the way she flinched at the bell above the door. The woman started pouring her coffee and asked her, "Are you staying out at the Hollow place?" Mara nodded. The woman paused and said, "That place is not right. It should have been torn down years ago." Mara leaned into the woman with her voice low, asking, "Why?" "People hear things out there," the woman said. "Things in the walls, in the ground." "In the basement?" Mara asked. The woman went quiet. Then she asked, "You opened the door?" Mara shook her head. "No, I didn't go down." "Good," the woman said. "Don't." That night, Mara checked into a motel. Just for one night, she told herself, just to get her head right. She fell asleep early, the television playing some reruns on low volume. But at exactly 3:17 a.m., the room phone rang. It shouldn't have. She hadn't given anyone this number. She picked up the phone with trembling fingers. All she heard was static. Then she heard. She hung up, heart in her throat. Then came a soft, slow knock at the motel room door. She backed away, eyes wide, waiting for it to turn into banging, screaming, something. But it didn't. She peered through the peephole, and no one was there. But as she looked, her breath fogged the glass, on both sides, like someone was breathing too, right up against it. She stumbled back and waited, then opened the door with a burst of courage and a hairdryer in one hand like a weapon. There was nothing there. A complete empty hallway. But at her feet was a small object. A key. To the basement of the house in Grayson Hollow. She didn't remember ever seeing one before. She hadn't needed a key. The door had always just been locked. She dropped the key and slammed the door shut, barricading it with the motel chair. The next day, she drove home. Not to the rental, but to her home. The city, civilization. Weeks had passed at that point, then months. No more phone calls, no more knocks. But then the dreams began. Always the same. She stands at top of the basement stairs. The door is open, and something is down there. Something moving just out of sight. And always she hears the same thing. And then her name. One night, she wakes to find dirt under her fingernails. Another night, to muddy footprints on her bedroom floor. She decides to install cameras in her apartment, but the next morning, they're gone. Not just turned off, physically missing. Wires yanked out and cases shattered. So she decides to call the police, but they find nothing. Then one night, her phone rings again with that unknown caller. It's been almost a year at this point. She answers the phone, and after those 3 knocks, a voice says, "You shouldn't have left the door closed." The line goes dead. That night, the lights in her apartment flicker out, and when she lights a candle and turns around, the basement door is there, in her living room. Old, wooden, covered in deep scratches. She doesn't remember installing a door here. She didn't. She grabs her phone, tries to call for help, but the screen is cracked, still glowing with a message. One last chance. Let me in. She runs out of the apartment into the hall, but every door is now a basement door. The elevator, a staircase down. Every window, blackness on the other side. And behind her, she hears. She turns around, and the door opens. 3 weeks later, her landlord files a missing persons report. Her apartment completely empty with everything intact, except the far wall of the living room. There's a door there now, one that no one can open, one that wasn't there before. Sometimes the neighbors complain. They hear knocking late at night. 3 knocks, always 3. And sometimes they hear her name. Now on to our next terrifying tale, where the fire is burning low and the trees outside are whispering secrets you were never meant to hear. This story is a reminder. Never joke about being in a horror movie, because sometimes you are. A group of friends head into the woods for a weekend getaway. No phones, no neighbors, no rules. Just an old cabin and a local legend they should have listened to. Because someone or something is waiting among the red pines. And it doesn't just want blood. It wants a story with one survivor. So lock your doors, don't look out the windows, and whatever you do, don't be the first to scream. This is Red Pines. They were 5 friends packed into a beat-up Jeep, bouncing down a gravel road toward a weekend they wouldn't survive. Jamie was the one who booked the place, a quote-unquote rustic escape in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forest and fog. Red Pines, it was called. Some private family cabin deep in the hills, miles from the nearest cell signal. The pictures looked quaint: wooden walls, stone fireplace, and an old axe mounted above the mantel like a hunting trophy. It was perfect. Off-grid, unplugged, booze, weed, and ghost stories. Classic horror movie setup. They even joked about it, realizing that this is exactly how a slasher starts. Jamie laughed and said that, "You can call me the final girl." They arrived just before sunset. The sky was pink-orange, the pines tall and dark. The cabin itself was older than the photos made it seem, leaning slightly with peeling paint and shutters hanging crooked like they've been given up on. There was an old man waiting for them at the bottom of the hill where the dirt road ended. No truck, no cabin of his own, just standing there as if he'd been waiting for them. He approached the car as the group of kids got out, thin, weathered, dressed in layers of wool and denim, like he hadn't changed in a decade. "Y'all don't want to stay here," the man said, his voice gravel-thick and hollow. They exchanged nervous glances. "Is this your land?" Jamie asked. He shook his head and said that it belonged to the Sunder family, been abandoned for years after the killings. Drew grinned. Here we go. Every horror cabin needs its creepy old guy. The old man's eyes locked on Drew's. They never found the last body. Then he turned and walked back into the trees without another word. The kids laughed it off, stuff of urban legends, just a weirdo trying to scare tourists. But as the trees swallowed the man, Jamie noticed something. His feet hadn't made a single sound walking on the gravel. Night came fast in Red Pines. 1 minute they were unpacking, the next it was pitch black outside. The forest pressing in with a silent, suffocating presence. The inside of the cabin was basic: a stone fireplace, moth-eaten furniture, an old radio, and that axe above the mantel. Its blade dull but stained a deep reddish brown. "This is pretty authentic," Drew joked. By the time the fire was going and the drinks were flowing, all their nerves had faded. Until Marley found a book. It was tucked behind a false panel in the cabinet. It was old, leather-bound, with pages yellowed and stiff. No title on the book, just a name inside the front cover: Elijah Sunder. They read aloud in turns, voices dipping with each passage. It wasn't a journal, it was a confession. Elijah had written about hearing voices in the woods, whispers that told him things, told him to hurt people, told him how to make them stop screaming. He described masks, carving them from bark and bone, becoming someone else when he wore them. something else. Then on the final page, it wrote, "She still talks to me from the trees. Her voice is inside. She told me how to stay. I left my skin behind, but I am not gone. I will not go, not until I finish the last one." They all looked at each other, and Jamie, trying to shake off the chill, said, "Okay, we're done with that." They all went to sleep, scattered around the cabin. Jamie in the master bedroom, Drew and Marley in the loft, and Tasha and Nate on the pull-out couch. It was Tasha who heard it first. A scratching at the window. She sat up, her heart started pounding. Nate was completely out cold beside her. She crept to the window and looked outside. There was nothing but trees. But as she turned away, she saw it. A shape, just at the edge of the firelight from the dying hearth. Human, but wrong. The arms were too long. The head cocked unnaturally to one side. It wore something. Looked like leather or bark, something gnarled. And a mask. Its eyes hollow and black. She screamed, and by the time the others came running, the window was cracked. A long smear of blood across the glass. Nate didn't wake up, because Nate wasn't breathing. His throat had been cut, clean and quiet, and on the floor, written in blood, said 4 left. Marley wanted to run into the woods, but Jamie stopped her, saying that the killer could be out there. Marley shouted that the killer's in here. So they barricaded the doors, tried the phones, but no signal, and the landline was dead. The Jeep, well, tires were slashed, and the old man was nowhere to be found. They were completely alone, trapped in this cabin. Jamie stared at the blood on the window and whispered, "Why didn't we hear anything?" But no one had an answer. One by one, the lights started to fail. First, the main breaker, then their flashlights. Even the radio died, a long crackling fade into silence. Drew found a knife in the kitchen and duct taped it to a broken broom handle like a makeshift spear. "He wants us scared," Drew said. "We give him scared, we lose." But by midnight, Drew was gone too. They found his body hanging from a tree behind the cabin, arms outstretched like a scarecrow, his mouth stuffed with pine needles. Pinned to his chest, a piece of the bark mask, and carved into his skin, 3 left. Marley snapped first. She blamed Jamie, said it was her fault, her cabin, her stupid idea. So she tried to run. Jamie tried to stop her. She didn't want Marley to die alone. But Marley didn't die alone. They both saw him, finally, moving between the trees like a liquid shadow. The mask covering his face like it looked like it'd been sewn from flesh and bark. Antlers rose from the top, twisting like roots. His body was bare, skin gray and scarred with ritual carvings. He didn't run. He stalked, slow and patient. And behind that mask was a second face, screaming. Marley never made it back. Jamie locked herself in the master bedroom with Tasha. They had the axe from above the fireplace, and it felt like a joke in her hands with how big it was. The clock hit 3 a.m. They didn't speak, they just waited. Until they heard a knock at the bedroom door. Slow, rhythmic. Tasha screamed. Jamie raised the axe, but when the door opened, no one was there. Just a mask on the floor. Fresh blood smeared along the inside, and carved into the wall behind it, 1 left. Morning came. The light outside was pale cold. Fog still clung to the trees. Jamie stepped outside the cabin barefoot, blood drawing on her hands, her eyes wide and blank, her breath slow and even. She wasn't running, she wasn't crying, she was humming, low and tuneless. In her hand was the axe, still dripping, and on her face, a mask. Not bark, not leather, but skin. 1 week later, 2 hikers found the cabin, completely empty except for the blood. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just 5 names scratched into the floorboards, with 4 crossed out. One was not Jamie's, and nailed to the door said Sunder Lives. You've been listening to Cabin of Horrors. If you enjoyed our tales tonight, make sure you follow, subscribe, rate, and leave the lights on, because you never know what's watching and waiting just beyond the tree line.